Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a topic that, let's be honest, makes a lot of folks break out in a cold sweat. Sales. If you hear that word and your brain immediately jumps to some pushy, fast-talking scammer trying to trick you out of your hard-earned cash, hey, you're definitely not alone. But stick with me, because I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you're going to walk away with a completely new and honestly incredibly refreshing perspective on what it actually means to sell.
Okay, let's dive into this. As the legendary Zig Ziglar brilliantly put it, selling isn't some magical, innate talent that you're simply born with. It's a learned skill. Giannis Miliotsis actually shares a hilarious, albeit pretty painful story about his very first sales pitch. He was supposed to be selling e-shops. This was back when practically no one even knew what an e-shop was. So absolutely terrified, he walks into a hair salon supply store, fumbles his way through this memorized, super robotic introduction, and the owner? Well, the owner basically yelled at him and practically kicked him out on the street. He walked away thinking, no way, is this what I have to do all day? But actually, scratch that. He quickly realized the problem wasn't that he lacked some innate selling gene. The problem was just his approach. Selling is an acquired, trainable skill.
And learning those skills is absolutely vital, mostly because sales are literally the oxygen of any business. Without them, the business just suffocates. Giannis learned this really early on. He basically grew up in his family's video club. Remember those? And by the time he was 10, he was already running the counter, learning how to serve all different types of customers. He learned firsthand the real truth behind that famous Chinese proverb, if you have a shop, you must learn to smile. You've got to know how to connect with people, even when, frankly, you'd rather kick them out.
But here is the secret that most companies completely miss. Everyone in a business is a salesperson. Yes, literally everyone. Let me give you a vivid example from a restaurant consulting job Giannis did. Everything inside this restaurant was perfect. The owner had invested heavily in training the waiters, the staff, the whole shebang. But they were bleeding clients. Why? Well, it turned out the delivery driver who brought the food to people's homes had a terrible attitude. One day, this driver actually threw a massive tantrum right in the middle of the restaurant just because he had to wait 5 minutes to get paid. The owner walked in, saw what was happening, paid him, and fired him right on the spot. That one single bad interaction at the very end of the line was costing them clients, which completely proves that anyone who touches the customer is essentially doing sales.
Which brings us right to this powerful truth from Maya Angelou. People will never forget how you made them feel. The stakes here are incredibly real, and the data absolutely backs it up. To put this into perspective, a massive 77% of consumers say they trust a company only if they trust the seller. Even more mind-blowing, 63% would actually prefer a trusted seller over a better price. Think about that for a second. People will willingly open their wallets and pay more if they simply feel good about the person they're buying from.
Let's move to and see how this builds over time. Because to understand how we got here, we've got to look at how sales strategies have evolved. Back in the 1850s, it was super simple, all about the product. Just show the item. Then, jump ahead to the 1960s, and we enter the era of the aggressive closers. Guys like Joe Girard, using intense, high-pressure tactics. By the 1980s, things shifted into more complex needs analysis, like spin selling. And eventually, we arrive right at the modern era, focusing heavily on trust-based systems.
Right at the cutting edge of this evolution is Jill Konrath's 2012 concept of snap selling. Think about the modern consumer. They are completely overwhelmed, right? They've already done all their research online way before they even talk to you. So your approach has to adapt. It must be simple, invaluable, aligned with their exact needs, and an absolute priority. SNAP. It's really no longer about tricking someone into buying. It's about providing fresh, vital ideas that genuinely help them out.
All right, moving to section 2, the paradigm shift, flipping the pyramid.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is where the effort actually goes in the old model. A staggering 40% of the energy is pushed entirely into the closing phase. The presentation is just this 30% monologue, rapidly firing off product features and getting to know the client's needs. The recognition phase is a measly 20%. The intro, barely an afterthought at 10%. This is your classic aggressive closer using cheap, memorized tricks. Sweating and saying things like, if I have it in red, will you buy it today? It's exhausting just thinking about it.
But the modern model literally flips the pyramid completely upside down. Today, 40% of your absolute focus is on building trust and rapport right out of the gate. Then, you spend 30% of your time truly analyzing their needs. By the time you get to that 20% presentation phase, you're only showing them exactly what solves their specific problem. And that dreaded high-stress closing phase, it shrinks to a tiny 10%. Why? Because if you've done the work, built trust, and found their exact need, closing is incredibly easy and entirely natural. No sweaty pressure tricks required.
So we transition completely from aggressive closing tactics to building genuine trust and relationships. And to really cement this paradigm shift, there is a golden rule you absolutely need to memorize. If all things are equal, a buyer will buy from a friend. And hey, even if things aren't equal, they'll still buy from a friend. That is the sheer power of this new focus.
Next up, Section 3, the toolkit, mastering trust and communication.
So the crucial point is, to prescribe the right cure for a client's pain, we need actionable tools. The absolute foundation of building that massive 40% trust layer is mastering the art of interpersonal communication. As Tony Robbins says, the way we communicate with others and with ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives. Think about it. If sales is communication and communication determines our life quality, we really better make sure we're doing it right.
But communication is incredibly fragile. It's kind of like a giant game of telephone. Think about it as a 4-step chain where things can go horribly wrong. Step 1, what I actually mean in my head. Step 2, what I manage to say out loud. Step 3, what you actually physically hear. And Step 4, how you interpret what you heard through your own personal biases. By the time my internal idea reaches your interpretation down at Step 4, it can get totally distorted.
The absolute biggest roadblock in that communication chain is how we listen. I have to ask you, are you committing these deadly listening sins? Come on, be honest. How often are you glancing at your smartphone or your smartwatch while someone is talking? Or even worse, how often are you completely tuning them out because you're busy rehearsing your pitch and formulating your very next sentence in your head? If you're constantly predicting what they'll say and getting impatient, you aren't building trust. You're literally just waiting for your turn to speak.
Overcoming these listening sins requires genuine empathy. It means actively leaving our personal biases right at the door. As Tony Robbins notes, we have to realize that we are all completely different, and people do not receive or process information the exact same way we do. If you want to communicate effectively, you have to adapt your style to their frequency, not force them onto yours.
And this brilliantly illustrates the best way to adapt your frequency, the DISC profiling framework. Giannis actually first discovered the need for this kind of personality adaptation back when he was working as a martial arts instructor. He realized pretty quickly that every single student needed a completely different approach to perform well. Some kids needed strict, tough love, others needed really detailed technical explanations, and some just needed a very relaxed, supportive environment. That exact same principle applies to every single client you will ever meet.
Let's break down these 4 quadrants practically so you can use them. You have the D type, the dominant personality. They just want the bottom line and fast results. The I type, the influencer, is highly social and people-oriented. They want to chat and connect. The S type is stable, maybe a bit more reserved and resistant to sudden changes. And finally, the C type is careful and highly analytical. They want all the data. Give them the spreadsheets. The massive trap most salespeople fall into is only successfully selling to people who act exactly like they do. I mean, if you're a chatty influencer trying to sell to a careful analytical type using nothing but jokes and smiles, you will fail. You have to adapt. When you pull the whole shebang together, you get a complete, absolutely foolproof sales system. You combine DISC profiling to understand exactly who you're talking to, you use active listening to discover their true underlying needs, and you focus heavily on building that bedrock foundation of trust. From preparation to presentation to the final follow-up, this holistic system completely demystifies sales. It totally takes the sleaze out of selling and turns it into a structured method of genuine problem-solving for anyone willing to learn it.
So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap things up today. Think about the very next professional conversation you're going to have. Are you still going to be communicating the hard way, rehearsing your own pitch in your head and committing those deadly listening sins? Or are you finally ready to flip the pyramid, adapt your style, and truly start building trust? The choice is entirely yours, but remember, the trust comes first. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we dive into more fascinating ideas.